Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Graham Sullivan was 42 years old and absolutely certain he knew his wife. 14 years of marriage, 2 teenage kids, a house in an Austin suburb with a neatly trimmed lawn, and a routine that ran like clockwork. He woke up at 5:45, made coffee while Danielle finished getting ready, dropped the boys off at school, and headed to the logistics company where he'd managed operations for nearly a decade. In the evenings, they had dinner together, watched a show, and went to bed early. It was a life without surprises or big emotions, but Graham had always believed stability was the most honest form of love. Danielle was 39 and worked as an accountant at a mid-sized firm downtown. She handled the household finances, filed their taxes, checked bank statements, and paid the bills. Graham never questioned this division of labor. After all, she was the numbers expert. He trusted her as naturally as he trusted the sun would rise the next day. That trust was so complete he never even looked at their joint account statements. When he needed cash, he just withdrew it. When Danielle said their finances were in order, he believed her. Why wouldn't he? Their kids, 15-year-old Lucas and 13-year-old Benjamin, were typical teenagers. Lucas played basketball at school and dreamed of a sports scholarship to college. Benjamin was more introverted, spent hours on the computer, and had a talent for coding. Graham was proud of both of them, even though conversations between father and sons had grown shorter, replaced by text messages and one-word replies. It was just their age, he told himself. Part of growing up. The first crack in this seemingly perfect life appeared on a Tuesday in March. Graham got a call from the bank saying their joint credit card was nearing its limit and asking if they wanted to request an increase. He found it odd, he couldn't recall any recent big purchases. He mentioned it to Danielle over dinner, and she explained she'd paid some early expenses for Benjamin's upcoming birthday party the following month. Graham accepted the explanation without blinking. Why would he doubt her? 2 weeks later, Graham suggested they go to the bank together to address the credit limit and take the chance to review their home mortgage. Interest rates had dropped, and a coworker had mentioned it might be possible to renegotiate better terms. Danielle hesitated for a fraction of a second before agreeing. Graham didn't notice the pause. Or maybe he did and chose to ignore it, the way we often do with small signs we'd rather not see. The bank occupied a mirrored glass building in downtown Austin. They arrived promptly at 10 a.m. and were greeted by Harold Simmons, their longtime relationship manager. Harold was a man in his 50s, gray hair slicked back, with a professional smile that looked rehearsed. He led them to a private room, offered coffee, and started pulling up their account while explaining mortgage refinancing options. Graham listened attentively, asking questions about fixed versus variable rates, when Harold frowned slightly at his computer screen. The gesture was subtle, but Graham noticed. Harold clicked a few times, scrolled down, and his expression shifted from confusion to caution. "Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan," Harold began, choosing his words carefully, "before we move forward with the mortgage, I need to mention something flagged by our compliance system." Graham felt Danielle stiffen in the chair beside him. It wasn't a dramatic movement, but he knew her body well enough to feel the sudden tension in her shoulders. "We've noticed unusual activity in your joint account over the past few months," Harold continued, swiveling the monitor so they could both see. "Recurring transfers to an external account not linked to any known vendor or registered service. Our security department identified the pattern and asked me to confirm whether you're aware of these transactions." Graham leaned forward, studying the numbers on the screen. Transfers of varying amounts, always between $1,500 and $3,000, made during the first weeks of each month. The recipient was an account in the name of Colton Reeves. The name struck Graham like a thunderclap on a clear day. Colton Reeves. The personal trainer. The tanned, square-jawed guy from the gym Danielle went to 3 times a week. Graham had met him once, briefly, when he picked her up after a session because her car was in the shop. Colton was 29, sculpted muscles, and a smile Graham had thought overly confident at the time. Back then, he'd brushed off his discomfort as silly insecurity. Danielle had every right to have a trainer. It was healthy. Normal. "Honey," Graham said, his voice calm in a way that surprised even him, "can you explain these transfers?" Danielle didn't answer right away. Her eyes were fixed on the screen, though Graham doubted she was really seeing the numbers. All the color had drained from her face, leaving her unnaturally pale. When she finally spoke, her voice came out strained. "They're personal investments. A fund Colton recommended. He's knowledgeable about finance and—" "Colton Reeves is a personal trainer," Graham interrupted. "Not a financial advisor." Harold Simmons cleared his throat, clearly uneasy about being caught in the middle of this conversation. "Maybe you'd prefer to discuss this privately. I can reschedule the mortgage meeting for—" "That won't be necessary," Graham said, standing up. "Thanks for the heads up, Harold. We'll be in touch to reschedule." The walk to the car was silent. Graham could hear Danielle's heels clicking against the marble lobby floor, then the concrete of the parking lot. Each click sounded like a metronome marking the end of something. He unlocked the car, opened her door with his usual courtesy, and walked around to the driver's seat. Only once they were inside, doors closed and the outside world blurred through the windshield, did Graham turn to face her. "Who is Colton Reeves to you?" Danielle started crying. Not the kind of crying you can hide behind a tissue. This was a full collapse, shoulders shaking with sobs, tears smearing the carefully applied makeup from that morning. Between gasps, words began spilling out in broken fragments. "I didn't plan it, it just happened. He makes me feel alive. You're never really present. I was so lonely." Graham heard every word, every justification, every attempt to shift blame. 8 months, she confessed. The affair had lasted 8 months. It started with conversations during workouts, moved to texts, then secret meetups outside the gym. She'd paid for dinners, gifts, short trips disguised as work conferences. The money was a way to keep Colton interested, she admitted, because he couldn't afford the lifestyle she wanted to share with him. Graham didn't yell. He didn't pound the steering wheel. He didn't say a single word while Danielle poured out her confession. When she finally fell silent, exhausted by her own breakdown, he started the car and drove home in complete silence. Danielle tried to speak a few times during the drive, but Graham kept his eyes on the road, hands steady on the wheel, expression unreadable. He pulled into the garage, got out, and walked into the house without looking back. Danielle stayed in the car for long minutes before finding the strength to follow him. That night, Graham slept in the guest room, not because Danielle had asked him to, but because he needed space to process what he'd just discovered. Lying on the mattress that creaked under his weight, staring at the ceiling stained by an old leak they'd never fixed, he mentally replayed every detail of the past months. The nights Danielle came home late from the gym, saying her session ran over. The weekends she went out to meet a friend Graham had never met. The times she seemed distracted at dinner, eyes glued to her phone with a smile he hadn't seen in years. The new perfume she'd started wearing, stronger and sweeter than her usual scent, which she'd said was a gift from a coworker. The signs had been there all along. He'd just chosen not to see them. The next morning, Graham woke before sunrise. The house was quiet, the boys still asleep, Danielle locked in the master bedroom. He made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and gathered his thoughts. He wasn't an impulsive man. Never had been. But he also wasn't the kind of man who'd let himself be made a fool of without understanding the full extent of the betrayal. At 6:15 a.m., while Danielle still slept, Graham picked up her phone from the kitchen counter. She didn't use a complex passcode, just a simple pattern he'd helped her set up years ago. His fingers paused for a moment before tracing the familiar shape. Part of him still hoped for an innocent explanation, that the money really was for investments, that Colton was just a friend. That part died the second the home screen lit up. What he found was worse than he'd imagined. There was a hidden folder in the gallery app, one that required a secondary password to access. Graham tried her birthday. No luck. Tried their wedding date. Also no. On a bitter impulse, he entered Colton's birthday, the one Danielle had casually mentioned months earlier when saying the trainer was having a birthday and she'd chipped in on a group gift. The folder opened. Photos. Dozens of them. Danielle and Colton at restaurants, on beaches, in hotel rooms Graham didn't recognize. Intimate selfies she'd never taken with her own husband. Short videos of moments that should have belonged only to a marriage. Each image was a cold blade through Graham's chest, every smile on Danielle's face in those photos a cruel reminder that happiness wasn't meant for him. He spent nearly an hour combing through the phone, taking screenshots of messages, jotting down dates and locations mentioned in texts. The exchanges between Danielle and Colton revealed an intimacy that went beyond the physical. She told him about the problems in her marriage, how predictable and boring Graham was, how she dreamed of starting a new life away from that suffocating routine. Colton responded with sweet words and vague promises, always punctuated by subtle requests for money. His rent was overdue, his car needed repairs, there was a can't-miss investment opportunity, a trip they could take together if she could help with the tickets. Graham saw the pattern with the chilling clarity of someone finally seeing the full picture of a puzzle that had been right in front of him all along. Colton wasn't in love with Danielle. Colton was farming her as a source of income. And Danielle, blinded by attention and desperate to feel desired again, had become a walking ATM for a man 13 years her junior who saw her as nothing more than an opportunity. But it was the final discovery that turned pain into something colder, sharper. While scrolling through older messages, Graham found a conversation between Colton and a contact saved only as "bro." It was a voice note exchange that Danielle apparently never realized Colton had accidentally forwarded to his own chat on her phone weeks ago, and then deleted, but which remained in the app's automatic backup. Graham pressed play, his heart pounding in his ears. Colton's voice came through the phone speaker, dripping with mockery that made Graham's stomach churn. "Dude, this Danielle is such a pushover. She pays for everything and actually thinks I'm gonna drop my life to be with her. Pathetic. But as long as the money keeps coming, I'll keep stringing her along." The laugh that followed was cruel, devoid of any affection. "I've got another one too, some Vivian, even older. These lonely married women are the best. They'll do anything for a little attention." Graham listened to the audio 3 times. On the third listen, something inside him hardened. It wasn't just anger or pain anymore. It was resolve. When Danielle came downstairs for coffee, she found Graham seated at the kitchen table with an expression she didn't recognize. It wasn't the rage she'd expected, nor the desperation she might have secretly wanted to see. It was something more unsettling, absolute calm that didn't match the devastation she knew she'd caused. "The boys are staying at your parents' this weekend," Graham said without looking up from his cooling coffee. "Call them and arrange it. We need to talk without interruptions." "Graham, about yesterday, I can explain better. I know it looks bad, but..." "You'll call your parents now," he interrupted, his voice level as still water. "Or I'll call and tell them exactly why the boys need to leave the house this weekend." Danielle made the call. The next 2 days were a kind of domestic purgatory. Graham and Danielle moved around the house like planets on orbits that never crossed. He slept in the guest room, had coffee before she woke up, and ate dinner after she'd already gone upstairs. When the boys asked why the atmosphere felt strange, Graham simply said their parents needed to sort out some adult matters and that everything would be fine. Lucas seemed suspicious but didn't press. Benjamin, absorbed in his coding projects, barely noticed the tension. On Thursday night, Graham made the call that would change everything. Marcus Webb was a family law attorney a coworker had recommended years ago when another employee went through a messy divorce. Graham laid out the situation plainly: unfaithful wife, documented proof, dissipation of marital assets. Marcus listened in professional silence, then explained the options. Texas was a no-fault divorce state, meaning Graham didn't need to prove infidelity to get a separation. However, evidence that Danielle had diverted marital funds to finance the affair would be crucial in dividing the assets. Marcus asked Graham to organize all statements, screenshots, and any other documentation he had. The more complete the dossier, the stronger Graham's position in negotiations. On Friday, while Danielle was at work, Graham searched the house for more evidence. In the back of a drawer in her closet, he found a small notebook Danielle used as a gratitude journal, a habit a therapist had suggested years earlier. The recent entries weren't about gratitude. They were about Colton. About how he made her feel young again. About vague plans for a future together once she finally found the courage to leave Graham. About her fear the kids would hate her, but her certainty they'd understand when they were older. Graham photographed every page. Then he put the notebook back exactly where he'd found it. The final confrontation happened Saturday afternoon. The boys were safely at their grandparents'. The house was quiet, the AC humming softly, Austin sunlight filtering through half-closed blinds. Danielle was in the kitchen making coffee she'd never get to drink when Graham walked in holding a thick manila folder she'd never seen before. "Sit down," he said, placing the folder on the table. "We have a lot to discuss." Danielle obeyed, eyes locked on the folder as if it held a death sentence. In a way, it did. Graham opened the folder and began laying out documents on the table one by one with the methodical precision of someone who'd organized logistic spreadsheets for a decade. First, bank statements with the transfers highlighted in yellow, $17,400 over 8 months. Next, printed screenshots of their messages, each word perfectly legible. The declarations of love. The money requests. The empty promises. Then, the photos. Graham didn't print the most intimate ones, but included enough to leave no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Finally, the transcript of Colton's audio message to his friend. "Read it out loud," Graham said, pointing to the transcript. "I want to hear you say the words the man you destroyed our family for used to describe you. Graham, please, don't make me read it." Danielle picked up the page with trembling hands. Her voice cracked several times as she read Colton's words. "This Danielle is such a pushover. She pays for everything and actually thinks I'm gonna drop my life to be with her. Pathetic." She couldn't finish. The paper fell onto the table, smudged by her tears. "You're not special to him," Graham said, each word spoken with a calm that took superhuman effort. "You're a revenue stream. One of several, apparently. The other one's named Vivian, in case you didn't know. He mentions her in the audio. Seems Colton has a type, married women, starved for attention, willing to pay for the privilege of being used by a gym parasite. I didn't know, he said he loved me, that he'd change his life, that we'd be together. And you believed him. You believed a man you'd known less than a year over the husband who'd stood by you for 14. You chose his lies over the truth of our marriage. Worse, you funded those lies with money that was ours, money that could have gone toward the boys' college, toward home repairs, toward anything that would have benefited the family you swore to love and protect. I was unhappy, Graham. You don't understand. You're never present. Always working, always tired, always somewhere else in your head. Colton saw me. Listened to me. Made me feel like I mattered." Graham took a deep breath before answering. "I worked to give you and our kids a comfortable life. I was tired because I was building something solid for our family. And if you felt invisible, if you needed more attention, you could have told me. Suggested couples therapy. Woken me up in the middle of the night and yelled that you were unhappy. Anything would have been better than what you did. But you chose the coward's path. You chose to lie. To cheat. And you literally paid for it, with money from our joint account. What are you going to do?" Danielle whispered, her voice reduced to a thread. "What should have been done the moment you decided to destroy our family? I'm filing for divorce. I've already spoken to a lawyer. The paperwork's being prepared. You can hire your own attorney or accept the terms Marcus will propose. Honestly, I'd advise you to accept, they're more than fair given the evidence of asset dissipation. Any judge will look at you with very little sympathy." Graham laid out the next steps with the same clarity he'd use for a work report. He'd stay in the house with the boys. Danielle would get alternate weekend visitation as outlined in the custody agreement. The asset division would account for the $17,400 she'd transferred to Colton, which would be deducted from her share of the marital estate. Child support would be calculated based on both their incomes, following Texas guidelines. "And the boys?" Danielle whispered. "What do we tell them?" "The truth. Age-appropriate, but the truth. That you made choices that hurt this family, and because of that, we can't live together anymore. They deserve honesty. It's the least we can give them after all this. Graham, I'm begging you. We can try therapy, we can work on this, I swear I'll never." "You had 8 months to suggest therapy. 8 months when you could have come to me, told me you were unhappy, that you needed more attention, that our marriage was suffocating you. Instead, you chose to lie. Every day you left the house to meet him, you chose the lie. Every time you looked me in the eye and said you loved me after being with him, you chose the lie. Every night you lay in our bed, the room where our children were conceived, you chose the lie. There's no therapy that fixes that. No excuse that erases it. What was between us is dead, Danielle. You killed it. And I refuse to live in its funeral." Graham stood up, closed the folder, and walked toward the kitchen door. Before leaving, he turned one last time. Danielle was hunched over the table, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The evidence of her betrayal spread before her like cards from a game she'd lost before even understanding the rules. "You have until Monday to find a temporary place to stay," he said. "Marcus will contact your attorney to discuss formal terms. And Danielle, if you ever try to turn the boys against me, twist the story, or paint me as the villain, I'll show them everything. The photos, the messages, the audio. All of it. I'd rather they know the painful truth than a comfortable lie. The choice is yours." The divorce process took 5 months. It was less contentious than Graham expected, partly because Danielle had no way to dispute the evidence of asset dissipation, partly because shame and humiliation kept her from fighting. In the first few weeks, she tried arguing the money given to Colton was a loan she intended to recover. No one believed her. Her attorney advised her to accept Marcus's terms and move forward with minimal damage. Graham kept the house and primary custody of the boys. Danielle found a 2-bedroom apartment in a more distant neighborhood, landed a job at a smaller accounting firm, and started a life nothing like the one she'd imagined when she began the affair with Colton. Lucas and Benjamin reacted differently to the separation. Lucas, older, seemed to understand more than Graham liked. One night, weeks after Danielle had moved out, the boy appeared at Graham's office door and asked point-blank if their mom had cheated on him. Graham hesitated only a second before confirming, without sordid details, but without lying. Lucas didn't speak to Danielle for almost a month after that conversation. Benjamin, younger and more attached to his mom, cried a lot at first but eventually accepted the new reality. Both continued living with Graham, visiting Danielle on alternate weekends per the custody agreement. As for Colton Reeves, Graham stumbled upon his fate almost by accident. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, he was having lunch with a coworker when the conversation turned to local gym gossip. The coworker mentioned that Colton, the most popular trainer at the place, had been fired after a married client discovered he was simultaneously involved with several women at the gym and made a public scene. The woman, a Vivian from Westlake Hills, apparently had a wealthy husband and even wealthier lawyers. She not only ended Colton's career at that gym but spread the story to every fitness center within 30 miles. Last the coworker heard, Colton had moved to Florida, supposedly to start over. Graham listened without showing any reaction. Inside, he felt something that could be called satisfaction, though it was more nuanced than that. It was the sense that the universe sometimes has a peculiar way of balancing the books. 8 months after the divorce was finalized, Graham was at the grocery store on a Saturday afternoon, picking out tomatoes for a new recipe he wanted to try, when he heard a familiar voice. "Graham?" He turned. Danielle stood a few feet away, an almost empty cart in front of her. She'd lost weight, her face thinner, dark circles under her eyes that no makeup could fully hide. Her hair, once always perfect, was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wore clothes Graham didn't recognize, simpler than her usual choices. "Danielle," he replied, tone neutral, neither hostile nor welcoming. "How are you? How are the boys?" "We're good. Lucas made the varsity basketball team. Benjamin won first place at the science fair with an AI project." "I know. They told me." There was a note in her voice Graham couldn't quite place. Maybe hurt at learning the news through the kids instead of experiencing it herself. Maybe just exhaustion. An awkward silence settled between them, filled only by the distant supermarket murmur, other customers' voices, background music, cashier beeps. Graham realized he no longer felt anger. No more pain. What remained was an indifference that, in its own way, was more final than any other feeling. "Colton's gone," Danielle said suddenly, as if the information might mean something. "I heard he left the state. Turns out he had other women the whole time. I was just one more." "I know," Graham replied. "I told you that the day we confronted it. You chose not to believe me. I thought you were lying to hurt me. Why would I lie? The truth was painful enough." Danielle opened her mouth to say more, but Graham gently cut her off with a small, almost kind gesture. "Take care of yourself, Danielle. Really. Not for me, not for the boys, just for you. You made bad choices, but that doesn't mean your life's over. Learn from it. Build something new. Be happy, if you can. I genuinely hope you do." He didn't wait for a reply. He put the tomatoes in his cart, gave a brief nod, and walked toward the dairy aisle. He didn't look back. In the parking lot, while loading groceries into the trunk, Graham noticed his hands weren't shaking. His heart beat at a normal rhythm. Seeing Danielle hadn't stirred anything but vague pity, the kind you feel for strangers going through tough times. She wasn't his wife anymore. Not even his enemy. Just someone he'd known well in another life, a life that ended the day a bank manager frowned at a computer screen. He drove home. Made dinner for the boys. Watched a basketball game with Lucas while Benjamin excitedly explained his next coding project, something involving voice recognition Graham didn't fully understand but pretended to, just to see the spark in his son's eyes. The house was quieter than before, emptier in some ways, but also more honest. No more lies lingering in corners, no more secrets hidden in phone folders, no more invisible tension from a life built on compromised foundations. That night, after the boys were asleep, Graham sat on the back porch with a cold beer and looked up at the Austin sky. The stars were few, drowned out by city light pollution, but they were there. They always had been. He thought of Danielle, alone in her small apartment. Of Colton, starting over somewhere in Florida, likely already hunting his next victim. Of the $17,400 that would never come back, the 8 months of lies, the nights he'd slept beside a stranger without knowing. Then he thought of the boys. Lucas's smile after sinking the game-winning basket. Benjamin's concentration as his fingers flew across the keyboard. The dinner table where the three of them ate together every night, talking about their days, making bad jokes, just being a family. Graham finished his beer, went inside, and locked the door. He checked that the windows were closed, the porch light was on, and the boys were sleeping. Then he went up to his room, the room that no longer smelled like Danielle's perfume, no longer held her clothes in the closet, no longer belonged to them but only to him. He lay in bed, looked at the ceiling, and for the first time in a long while, felt nothing but peace. Sleep came easily that night. And when it did, it brought no dreams. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.